He's a historic preservation contractor and owner of Old Home Rescue. Old Home Rescue specializes in preserving historically significant structures and buildings. Since 2015, Old Home Rescue has completed repair, restoration, or maintenance projects on hundreds of projects throughout Oklahoma and the region, including the Will Rogers Birthplace Ranch, Overholser Mansion, Stoney Point Schoolhouse, State Capitol Publishing Museum, as well as the Highland Cemetery Arch right here in Lawton, Oklahoma. We also got to work with him on we have a Carnegie Library that just last year wasn't inhabitable. It had several different issues going on with it, and through different assessments, through working with Old Home Rescue, we now actually have art classes going on in that building. One of the kind of the expertise that Morgan brings is both from the engineering aspect, the troubleshooting aspect, as well as maintaining the historical integrity of a building. Many people come in and say, well, I can fix that, but what's it going to look like? And Morgan and his company, specialize in going, we're going to fix it, and it's going to look like we were never here, because it's going to look that good, and it's going to look the way it originally should have looked. And so with Carnegie Library, we started off, and I was like, hey, I want to try to repair this damage here. And he's like, well, what's causing that damage? Like, I don't know. I want to repair that. And he's like, let's look at that. And so, through, his assessment, we fixed the different water leaks, the different easements that were causing the additional damage, and then we got that repaired, and we were able to go in and fix the interior repairs. And so pretty much saving us money from, saving us from ourselves, of those who do not know what we're doing, to be able to do projects and to do them correctly. So with that said, Morgan Reinart.
Good. Thank you, Jason. It's really hard to hear such good things about yourself. So that was a great introduction. So I'm a little baffled getting started, but overall, what Amy and the others have done to initiate this plan for the next 100 years, or for this New Deal work, the big picture. But without the structures and the other things that are a part of this, then we don't have anything to go back to. So there's this big plan of what has to happen, but there's also like the intermediate or these smaller level plans that we have to really focus on, because we get to celebrate a centennial, but if we don't do things right this time, we don't get to have a 200th anniversary of this. So I didn't mark this one. This is the Pawnee Bathhouse. Just absolutely beautiful, and it's a great example in northeast Oklahoma of this era. So a little bit about us. We are, I own Old Home Rescue. We are a historic preservation contractor that just specializes in the repair, restoration, and maintenance of historic homes, buildings, and structures. The home got tagged in there early. We're doing all kinds of stuff now, so it's been commercial buildings, cemetery entrances, and anything really in between. But in addition to this, I feel like this has been coming up more and more often. One of the things that we have to be is storytellers of our built environment. And because every building, every structure, every home, it has a story to tell about all of those who have passed through its doors. And that's what we get to do. Jason mentioned engineer. I'm not an architect. I'm not an engineer. I don't have a degree in construction management. I often get the question of, how'd you get into doing what you do? And it is not a linear path that brought me here. So I have a degree in biology and health and sports science. I was headed to pharmacy school, applying for pharmacy school, and didn't want to do it. And I wanted to do something that I felt was more meaningful, that I could give back to those around me, and I could work with my hands. And so I spent 10 years as a firefighter, and decided that wasn't for me after 10 years. Moved into becoming a partner at our preceding company, and shifted with COVID to Old Home Rescue. But since 2015-16, we've worked on over 300 historic projects. And that sounds really great, and I have thousands of lessons learned on what you shouldn't do on historic homes that we've learned during that time. I've got to see thousands of historic structures and really cool stories, and that's what I really love about all of this. But also in doing this, I've gotten to see what was done wrong 100 years ago, what was done wrong 75 or 50 years ago, and then what was done wrong last week to these structures, and learning our lessons from them so we don't have that, we don't repeat that. And then this year I stepped in as the, my family, or my wife and I are now the owners of Old Home Rescue rather than a partner. So this is my passion, this is what I love doing. But my story with the New Deal starts here. This is my sister and brother. I didn't expect to get emotional about that. That's me sitting at Romanos. And Romanos is a huge part of my childhood. And didn't realize WPA and all of those things, but it is a core memory of my childhood.
Are you the middle one?
Yeah, I'm the chubby little one in the middle. But the next real memory I have of looking at these structures is Daniels Field in Perry. My brother was a high school football coach. This was his first coaching job out of college. And I leave OSU, drive over to Perry, and pull up at this game to watch one of his first games. And I pull up the field. Wow, this is really cool. Daniels Field is a football stadium with a baseball stadium on the other side. It's all integrated together in this beautiful stonework. And it just, something felt different. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know the story of the WPA. None of that stuff was something that even crossed my mind. But it drew out some type of emotions that I was a college kid and pushed away for a little bit. But this is really where it all changed for me. And I don't know if any of you guys were How I Met Your Mother fans, but they have a reference in it that's the glass shatters. And once you find something out, it's like glass. It shatters and it can never be put back. You can never look at it the same. And that's what happened with the Highland Cemetery for me. I showed up, and this is a 2-year-long project, and they'll talk more about the history and what this meant to the city, but I showed up and started learning the history of this building and what it meant to the city and what the citizens were going through and how it was closed for 2 years. People couldn't drive through the gate and see their loved ones, and all of this stuff started kind of flooding, and then learning about the other projects throughout Oklahoma all kind of coincided with this. And that glass was shattered for me. It was really cool. We were awarded the project after nearly a 2-year search for a qualified contractor and the best plan for this. Had to talk before Lawton City Council on why we were more qualified, and we're going to take the appropriate approach for that next 100 years of this structure. And after award, we have mobilized and within 60 days solved the problem that they had been facing for over 2 years, or close to 2 years. But these structures are, Dr. Janda really, when his reaction talking about the rocket slide, that's what these structures do to us. And we don't even know it. We're not all as animated as he was with it, but we have those feelings, those tangible connections inside of us that are associated with these, that they're part of who we are. Yes, there's the history piece that everybody can talk about, and that I'll leave the historians to tell why they're historically significant, but that emotional, tangible side of they're part of who we are. And it really aligns well with how we feel about Main Street. You walk down that Main Street block and you feel nostalgic. There's something drawing you back to it, bringing out emotions. And that's because there's stories of pavilion picnics, hikes with your dad, community, memories of loved ones, baseball games, vacations, all of these things. And it's one of the few places that you can go in Oklahoma, and it's nearly identical to how it was 100 years ago in many of these places. Again, Romanos, it's the trail down to the pavilion, but there's something different about seeing structures like this. In Romanos, right outside the bathhouse, there's this really beautiful staircase that goes up to the parking lot. It's simple. There's nothing really great about it, but there's weddings that are right there. Nobody gets married on a concrete step walkway. They get married on WPA projects and CCC projects. But it's these tangible connections that we have to the past. And if we don't take care of them, they're a fleeting memory, because once they're gone, we throw up a plaque that 1 in 10 people read when they walk by. And that, yes, the history is still there, but our connection with history is lost. So that's why we have to be so careful about how we plan for these projects, because in the work that we do, it's so often, the original building materials aren't the problem, it's what we've done to those original building materials since then. So, as you guys start your projects, this is a really great quote that I came across during this. Before reading this, nostalgia, I heard it on a Very Okay podcast, democratization of the outdoors. We're going to get people to go outdoors, and it is going to be a tourism thing. Nostalgia is the #1 most underrated commodity that is out there. And so, how do we do that? And how does that impact everybody else? This is a great line. Nostalgia raises self-esteem, which in turn heightens optimism. Our findings have shown that nostalgia does have the capacity to facilitate perceptions of a more positive future. Memories of the past can help maintain current feelings of self-worth and can contribute to a brighter outlook on the future. When we think about what we are doing, this thought never, I knew it because I love it, but I didn't know that it actually affects people other than me like that. It reminds us of our childhood. So, as we start these projects, we have to do it right. And I think it's first important to note, what type of project are you going to do? Because these all have very different costs. They have very different people that will be involved with it, but these are generalized definitions from the National Park Service. So preservation is sustaining the form and integrity and the materials. Essentially, we're going to repair, stabilize, and maintain. We're keeping it simple. What is the best thing that we can do right now so that it doesn't get worse? Restoration means we're going to return it back to its original form and function, and we're going to remove those non-period items and reconstruct the missing ones. Rehabilitation means that we're going to use the structure, preserve the character, but we're going to maybe change the use of it, and how do we do that? These definitions, while they kind of get overlapped a lot, they're really, really critical, because preservation could be X cost, and restoration, to recreate these things, is way up here. But the end result, if we're understanding those things with whoever the user is, if we're understanding what the end goal is, then we can tailor it and save money while getting that same overall goal. One of the things, a couple cost considerations with this are these, but also quality versus cost. Maybe we have a $100,000 budget, but it's going to take $140,000 to do that. Are we going to do it one time for $140,000, or are we going to do it for $100,000 now and another $100,000 in 10 years? Again, the longevity of the materials used. Today's most building materials are not designed to last more than 15 years. So how do we incorporate new building materials into the old? And then what happens after this? Because great, we raised $1 million, we're going to do this project. How are we going to spend the 2 to 4% that it takes of the building's cost for annual maintenance alone? And if we don't have all of those cost considerations in mind, we may need to tailor what we're going to do with it. And one of the other things with it is taking into account your procurement ordinances, bylaws, or the state statute, because if you have a preservation project, then your city ordinance says that you can direct contract for anything up to $25,000, then maybe a $100,000 project gets split up into 4 separate preservation projects. And we can work within these rules to make sure that we're really taking care of these projects. The next thing is picking the right team. This is all going to kind of land on what your project is going to be. Stevenson Park, preservation-minded architect. You're going to have a great contractor with this. And anytime you have an architect and engineers involved, we really want to bring contractors in early so we can start collaborating, because architects and designers and they may be separated from our costs a little bit, and so we may have this great idea and plans get put together and construction documents are out there, and next thing you know, we're 2 or 3 times the budget for the project. So if you are bringing in a contractor for one of your projects, bring them in early in the conceptual phase. Start working those out, because if you're at 30% completion on construction documents, it's a whole lot easier to make changes than you are at 90%. And you're going to have cost savings by paying a contractor to work from the early stages. You may need a preservation consultant, depending on those types of projects, or you may need designers, engineers, and maybe even an owner's rep if, however, these projects are going together based on their size, scope, and complexity. I want to talk about I'm a contractor, so I'm going to hit on contractors because that's who I know the best and know the most about. It's really important to know what you should expect out of your contractor in qualifications. These are not the qualifications that I put together. These were on the request for proposal for the Highland Cemetery. I wasn't the consultant on that. It was actually done by Pishney Restoration Services out of Kansas. Corey, he does a fantastic job. They are truly great. These were Pishney and the city putting these requirements together, and since I read these, it just makes sense. So if we're going to have a contractor working on it, we want one that specializes in the historic repair, restoration, rehabilitation of these structures, because a generalist won't work. If you're building new developments and trying this and trying that and all of these other things, we haven't specialized and know the ins and outs of these historic structures. They also called for a minimum of 5 years experience in historic restoration on properties, either through National Register or State Register. And again, I've talked about all the lessons we've learned, all the warranty work that we have done, because new construction has manufacturer's specifications. You're installing hardy siding. They have a 200-page booklet that they spent several $millions on. It tells you a step-by-step instruction. And it's a very gray area in historic. So we've had to take specifications and lessons learned and then collaboration between architects and designers and all of those things to be able to, how do we do this in a way where it's actually going to last? And then 3 references of completed projects within the last 3 years. A couple of the things that I like to add as additional considerations that are my preferences to give to people are, do they have general liability that's going to cover both for the type of work in which they're going to do? Because a lot of these projects on these small to mid-sized projects are going to land below the threshold of your large-scale construction management companies. Many of them don't want to come out and do a project of that size, but it is also slightly above the professional qualifications of your typical residential contractor. And there is a weird space in insurances that lands in all of that. So you want to make sure that your buildings and properties are properly taken care of in the event that something does happen. So general liability that covers both the work they're going to do, the value of the building, and the structure itself, because a lot of these they may be I keep thinking of the Rocky House. It's a very simple little Victorian 1,200 square foot house, but it's a commercial property. And the insurance to work and touch that property are totally different than if the house was across the street and somebody was living in it. Workers' compensation. Are we doing OSHA standards? Do we need to do a performance bond or a maintenance bond, a bid bond to protect ourselves? And one of the things that I come back to is 3 projects in 3 years enough? That's going to be based on what your project is. So why is pre-construction so important? And I think we understand it more in this commercial realm than maybe residential realm, but we get to weigh those options of what treatment are we going to be doing to this house? Is it a preservation project? Is it a restoration? Is it a rehabilitation? And then is our budget going to align with any of those? Do we know some basic costs of what we're asking to do is going to cost at this point in time? And then how do we value engineer it? Because, like I was saying, maybe we don't restore the windows, or we repair the windows. And now all of a sudden we cut 60% of the budget out by changing the word and the scope of work. But it also provides a clear scope of work of what exactly what's going to happen. All too often I've seen from others repair masonry. Well, what does repair masonry mean? What mortar are we using? Are you doing a sealant on top of it? Or we're going to replace the shingle roof. Well, what size, grade, underlayment? Are you doing an air barrier? Like all of these things start to ravel, and without that clear scope of work, you may have paid a whole lot of money for something that's going to last 3 to 5 years. And we really don't want to do that. Because it's going to save money in the long run, because I can't imagine going through a capital campaign on your guys' end and having to raise $50 or $100 or $1 million and then go back to them 7 years later and say, we messed up and we need to do it again. Because they're probably not going to donate the money the second time. And we do have one opportunity to get it right. We also have to weigh the historic versus modern building science issues. The moment we added air conditioners to a historic building, we created one of the most complex things to work around that nobody truly understands how hard it actually is. And if we change this, then this happens. And if this happens, then this. And it compiles, and we want to start with the why. Why does it do that? How do we fix that? How do we stop it from happening again? I'm going to walk through 2 particular projects. Neither of them I did the planning on, and so I thought that was a really unbiased. We did work on the island, but we didn't put the plan together for it. But a case for a really well-planned, successful project, and then one that did not go so well. So, as I said, consultant, I believe it was Pishney. We'll find out if I was wrong on that. I'm pretty sure that they did it. Pishney Restoration Services out of Kansas came down and did the scope of work for the city of Lawton. The scope, for those of you that don't know, recanting the story that I was told, trash truck driver drives into the correct entrance on, I believe, his first day of work, drives into that entrance and does not realize, or was not told, that the cemetery entrance was too short for the trash truck to make it through. He goes to leave the cemetery and smashes the horizontal structure of it, shifting it about 6 to 8 inches off of this lintel and the vertical columns below it. It is complicated. So by the time the RFP goes out, this is what the RFP looks like. And while simple, it's really, really detailed in the words for a contractor. So repoint the vertical columns using a lime mortar. Disassemble, palletize, and label the horizontal assembly. They called for a new lintel with a W-beam across there, and then to lay all of that up in the exact same place and orientation that it was before as it was documented. Install some rope weeps, and then clean the entire structure with a historic masonry detergent, and then repair, repaint, and fix the damaged gate down below. by the time we came in, we made a couple changes because this is where it's important of the details. 1930s was, lime mortar had already shifted out of use in Oklahoma. There's been mortar analysis as far back as like the 1870s in Kansas, where there's the introduction of Portland cement because of us settling in these areas. They were bringing that Portland in and starting to use it earlier on. So in a historic masonry structure, the first and most important thing is to do a mortar analysis, because the cost of lime mortar, an 80-pound bag is $100 when it's shipped to Oklahoma. The cost of what we were told after a mortar analysis from an architectural conservator was that it was type N mortar, which was 1930s Portland cement. It's just softer now. So that type N mortar is $15 a bag. We have like $30,000 in savings alone in material by doing the $650 mortar analysis. Slow down in the beginning means we get to be way more efficient and save money in the long run. And then we made a couple other small changes, and one of them that I felt like contributed to this project being able to be done in 60 days was this lintel. After talking to everybody, nobody knew what was actually in there. It was built by the WPA, no record of what was in there. There were all kinds of guesses, and every one of them was great and would have made sense, but nobody actually knew what it was. And that was one of the things that I really had a lot of caution with was, I don't want to change anything about this, because the moment I change that, now everything changes. Will those stones go back in the same place? Will we have to have extra stones? Is it going to impact how it absorbs water and it all comes out? And just, it spirals once we start changing these historic structures. So whenever we can, don't change it. Just put it back like you found it, but make it look great. But the difference is, even with a well-planned scope of work, you can make pivots and they're not that big of a deal. This top right one looks so silly, but what happened in the delay, because we went through one city council meeting and it didn't get voted and had to go, or it didn't get approved and had to go to the next, was that we hit a cold front in the middle of this. This thing is completely disassembled, there's a timeline, everybody wants us to finish it, and the worst thing that you can do is have nobody working on the project. So we called that same architectural conservator and said, it's freezing outside. How do we do historic masonry without breaking any of your rules? How do we break the rules without causing any long-term implications? And they walked through some of those. We used, I'm a Western Oklahoma, my family grew up on a farm, and so like I hate being told no for an answer. So these are cattle trough heaters, heating the water up so that it wasn't cold water that was being used, which made the mortar dry appropriately. And then we built a very silly looking enclosure around our scaffolding and heated it during the day so that heat would be maintained inside of there, and then covered it with concrete blankets. And through all of this, we got to work in, specs say that it can't go below 40 degrees for 2 days after you apply mortar. But because of these steps, we were able to do this without causing any long-term issues. That's a big pivot if we don't have a really well-planned scope of work and we're trying to figure it out as we go. But this is the example of what happens when we have a misstep in planning. And this looks small, and I did that because I didn't want to show what building this actually is, just in case anybody's connected to it in any way. But this is that case for local nonprofit raised $50,000 to $75,000 to do this massive project that they knew needed to be done. And they made a whole bunch of little tiny issues. And 7 years later, nearly the entire building looks like this. Siding's rotted off, the windows are rotted, they had to put brackets on them already because their 7-year-old windows are falling apart. This is gonna have to be redone, and it's gonna be probably 2 to 3 times the cost that they've already spent on it. So where did they go wrong? They removed all of the original old growth siding that was naturally rot resistant, and installed a water-resistant barrier, which if you guys drive by new houses, it's the white wrap that's around it, which now means that now this house isn't able to breathe, it's not able to dry out. And the moment we put that on there, completely changed the building science that the building was built to have, and everything changed. So now they installed new wood siding, which is yellow pine, wind maintained annually, will last 20 years, not primed on all 6 sides, and not treated with like a pre-treatment such as borate, which keeps termites and fungus and all of this stuff away. And with historic buildings, and really buildings in general, it's not about when water gets in, it's about what, if water gets in, it's about what happens when it does. And this got wet, and now we have the perfect conditions to grow rot, because it's wet on the backside, on top of that house wrap, on an unprimed surface with siding that is not rot resistant and wasn't pre-treated. And 7 years, this picture was taken 4 years ago. I don't want to know what it looks like now, but I know it's going to be really bad, and I feel so awful for them because they went to their local, their 4 or 5 local donors who are amazing to them, asked them for money, and they are that exact same thing that's going to happen. They've got to go back and ask again, or hopefully get a grant. So between these 2 projects, I don't know what was spent on the consulting side of it, even if it was $10,000, so $2,000 to $10,000 range. You have the Highland Cemetery who's ready for annual maintenance, and it's going to last another 100 years. And the city can now use other funds on all of the other projects that they want to do, versus we have to come back to this one. And honestly, this structure might not last another 20 years because of what's been done to it. So here's my homework for you guys. Find funding for planning. There's 2 ways that a nonprofit and a state agency do this. OHS has their Heritage Preservation Grant. Inside of it, you can do strategic, from my understanding, that's for them to say yes or no to, but from my understanding, you can use it for strategic planning. And if your collections or exhibit is the building itself, then you can use it towards that strategic planning and this work. Also, Heather just started at Preservation Oklahoma. She is so excited and so fantastic, and lots of stuff are happening there. Connect with Preservation Oklahoma, because they started working with Bank First, and now they have a 1-to-1 matching grant for planning that is up to $1,500. So you can get a $3,000 planning project, which is sufficient on many of these small to mid-sized projects, and you're only footing half the bill. Now have your buildings assessed and documented, because even if the project isn't going to happen next week or tomorrow or next year, now you can start planning for it. How much is it going to cost? How much do I need to start asking these donors for? What grants do I need to apply for? It all happens with, we have to know what's happening and what needs done. Create a deferred maintenance plan. This is something that we did for the Harn Homestead. They have 8 buildings that kind of transcend territorial Oklahoma. And we went through with each of their buildings and created a list on each building. And is it a critical repair, or is it a low thing that we need to keep an eye on it and do it? But now we can start, once we have the deferred maintenance list, now we can start checking these things off of the list and start working towards that annual maintenance, because annual maintenance at 2 to 4% of the building's value is a little bit that gets to be squeezed into a line item of your annual budget. You may not get a $1 million project squeezed into the budget, but a $10,000, $5,000 maintenance line item, absolutely, you can squeeze that in most instances. And find a qualified professional. I'm not saying to work with us. I have a biased opinion of working with us, but there's others out there. The state contractor and consultant list is a good resource for that. The state can't specifically say any of them, so they'll just give you a long list, and you've got to start talking to all of those. There's some really great ones out there. I mentioned Pishney. they're out of Kansas. They do work in Oklahoma. They're really great too. And there's other architects, engineers, and everything like that that specializes in this. So I just really recommend finding one, developing a relationship with them, because when they call and the hailstorm and tornado comes through and there's glass broken on their depot sitting right out here, we get a call that says, can you come by and look at it? Absolutely. We want to have that ongoing relationship because these buildings aren't getting any newer, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship. But bringing it back to the beginning, we started by talking about those memories. How they're woven into who we are in our lives and the tangible connections to those stories. And if we don't do anything, they're going to fade until they're gone. So we have good news. We've got several years of planning for this. And if we do it right, and we make it a priority, we can keep these places standing. Not just for us, but for the generations who will come after us. So they can make their own new memories. If you guys have any questions, Jason wanted to do a little bit of Q&A afterwards.
Test. All right, there we go. Okay, yeah, we wanted to have a little Q&A session. So if you have different structures that you're concerned about, or the approach, one of the reasons about bringing Morgan as a speaker, as you can see, is that yes, he is one of our sponsors, but also just giving the general information about how to go about planning for the project and the things to consider as you go in. And one of the things that we found with the city, both Jim Whiteley, who's the curator here at the museum, and myself, we serve on our city cultural preservation committee. And one of the things that we look at is how are things being preserved and how we go about repairing things and what should be done. And so it's kind of reaching out to entities like Old Home Rescue to kind of get those questions answered. So does anyone have questions? Yeah.
Can you talk us through if it's appropriate? If I may be picking an example that may not be, but if it is, how you all are bringing back to life the Carnegie
Library Town Hall.
Yes.
Yeah, we can actually talk about that a little bit, especially with Old Home here. So one of the things is I came on with the city of Lawton just over 3 years ago now. And one of the things that I found that was within arts and humanities was basically care of historical artifacts, and historical buildings kind of started following along with that. Our Carnegie Library currently is the home to our local Arts for All organization. They inhabit the basement. And so I was going to meetings there. And as I was going to meetings there, I was like, wow, this building is beautiful, and it's historic. It's one of the, it's not, there's, I think 19 Carnegie Libraries still left in the state of Oklahoma, or maybe a little bit less, I don't know. I'll have to take a look. So maybe making some numbers up, so don't quote me on that one. But there's not many of them left, and so the importance of kind of preserving the building. It's also just, some of the architecture that Morgan has shared with you, some of the ones that you saw earlier in the presentations, it's not often that buildings are built that way today. And so going in there and seeing, what has to happen with that building. And so one of the first things that we started doing is, well, why isn't this building in more use? And so, one is that, there was water penetration that was causing damage to the interior of the building. And that was something that Morgan with Old Home Rescue was able to help us to identify and restore and to fix. To then, hey, we're now able to repair those interior walls that just look terrible. Before my time with the city, and again, this is the kind of stressing the importance of that planning and follow through. Old Home Rescue was actually contracted to restore the windows. That's where a great water penetration was occurring. The sills were rotting out. And so his company came in and they redid all the windows in Carnegie Library. And they did a quote. They said, okay, this is how much it will cost. And at the time, they said, well, you do this part and we'll take care of the sealant afterwards. Well, the sealant afterwards didn't exactly happen. And so now, we're looking for quotes and, looking at how do we go back and fix it and go, you know what, let's just fix it completely. One of the things about the challenges within city governments is we are, on tight budgets, we have annual budgets, and things are approved one year, not approved another year. So it's just looking at, what needs to get done, the pre-planning process, and getting the right people. So after we fixed the water penetration issues and we fixed, those areas, we also, the roof was replaced. That was shortly before my time that I came on. However, since the hailstorm, it was damaged again, so we had to have a company come out and patch it. But there was water damage to the first floor of the Carnegie Library. And so not only to the walls, but to the floor there was damage. We said, okay, well, what if we repair those two things? What else do we need to get done? Well, the bathrooms no longer work because nobody's been in that building. So another step in preserving buildings is looking at how do we get the buildings back into use. So it's how do we get them habitable, and then how do we get people back in them, because now that we're back into that building, if there's a water issue, you can identify it right away before you look at the wall and go, wow, that whole wall's caving in. You can see, hey, there's a leak, let's look at how to repair it. And so working with, taking the historical importance from the very beginning, and then fixing out what can we do to get people back into the building. And then right now, one of the things that we're looking at is the front entryway. And so, do you want to talk a little bit about the front entryway? I'll toss that back over to you so you can talk about how you kind of assessed it. And so there are times about kind of the decision to, and I don't know if you got into it in your presentation, but to restore or replace. Did you get into that?
A little bit.
Yeah. So if you want to talk about the front stairway of Carnegie Library.
Yeah, so I don't have a picture of it right offhand to pull up, but it's a really beautiful concrete entrance with a landing that you walk up to it. It's got, I think it still has some trees and landscaping on either side, and was approached to replace the front steps. And the question was, why do we need to replace them? Can we repair them? Ultimately, look at it, and over 100 years, the steps have been worn down so much that the rebar is showing through. Water was getting inside from multiple areas. And so this is one of those questions of why do we have damage? Is it just the steps problem? And it actually isn't just the steps problem, but it's the portico over the door. This mortar's missing, it's leaking through. The cheek walls that go around either side, mortar's missing, water's going through, absorbing into the concrete itself, causing that oxide jacking that's happening, and then probably some overwatering of plants. So we have, yes, we can replace it, just the concrete steps going up, but unless those things are done too, then we're gonna end up with the same problem. And so in this situation like this, it was a smaller consulting project where came through and just looked at it and said, if you want to replace the steps, we also need to do some masonry work. There's electrical tied to it. How's that going to happen? You can't see it very well, but all of these balusters are cast in stone concrete. How do we do that? What's the most cost-effective way to do that? And then, do we also need to make sure we have a vapor barrier that's within the concrete as an additive to make sure we aren't pulling moisture in from the surrounding areas and causing the same issue? And we have nice squared off steps going up, but you can see that those radius pieces. Because of that, do we need to look at fiberglass rebar versus steel rebar, and what's the best option for that? And these are all really, really important questions that are all associated with a concrete entrance. And that's the depth that we have to look with all of these things, so that they're here for another 100 years rather than another 20.
All right, thank you for that question. Also, I would be completely remiss if I didn't also include one step in that process, and that was that there was a lot of historical artifacts in that building. And so Jim Whiteley in the museum, we teamed with them to actually go through and tag and number every artifact that we took out of that building, so it was identified of what goes back in. So when we were reopening the building, we revisited with Jim and we looked at, what items can we start putting back into that building that actually capture the history of it. So different pictures of the building, pictures of librarians that were there, of course the picture of Carnegie himself that is prominently displayed in every Carnegie library. And so just the networking and teaming with entities, historical entities, to make sure that we're doing it the right way. Because me going in there, I didn't know what to do with the stuff, and that's where Jim Whiteley and the museum, offered their expertise. And things I wouldn't have even thought of if I didn't teach at the museum, but making sure you're using archival paper, so it doesn't deteriorate. I was like, oh my gosh, wow, the level of thought in the coding and the systems. And we found some amazing artifacts that were just there, that we look forward to restoring there eventually as we start getting more of the structural things taken care of, such as the original book purchase when the library was opened. It was just so cool. And it was just sitting in there on some shelves, and they're like, wow. We need to make sure that this is preserved, and so we're actually very thankful also to the museum to letting us kind of temporarily house some of that stuff here in a safe environment while we're then moving forward. So, any other questions? Anyone have projects that they're looking to restore? Amy.
So I have a cleaning question, but first off, I want to say thank you for being a sponsor, and you were a sponsor last year too. I really appreciate that. Morgan and his team is working with our house from 1901. It's kind of a Victorian-looking house. And what he mentioned about sometimes having a maintenance line item makes more sense. We didn't have hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we had wood rot issues. So we built it into the budget for, I don't know, $5,000, $10,000, $12,000 a year. And he comes in and he fixes and spot checks the most important things until the day that we can save that big money. So that was a very smart and valuable approach, and it worked with our city management. So I want to mention that. Okay, my question is about cleaning rock. I'm in a sandstone building. We've got park buildings, lots of rock buildings. Over time they start growing that moss and mold, and they turn black. One of my former mayors said that they had brought in a whole team of volunteers with scrub brushes, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, and scrubbed all that black off, and I'm thinking, oh, I wonder how much damage that did. But it's starting to grow back, and what do we do?
Yeah, so there are specific historic masonry detergents, such as D2 Biologic, and then Limeworks has one. I forgot the name, Richard probably knows, but there are specific solutions. There also has to be specific ways that they're applied, because we don't want high pressure for the application. Sometimes it's a light rinse, or sometimes it's that you can use heated water with under a certain PSI. There's so many rules out there, but it's really like, if we get to those products like the D2 Biologic, or it's been used on the White House, and then the other one at Limeworks, they can really clean that and remove the growth that's happening, the mildew that may be happening, and things like that in a safe way, so we're not damaging it. And just to note, like, I was at a house this week that had been sandblasted. Don't use any blasting media at all on any stone masonry structure at all. It's so bad on the houses.
All right, thank you so much. Good up for Morgan.